Hi, welcome to the Women for Women International Book Club. I'm Laura Jan, and I'm joined today by author, activist, and journalist Gayle Tzemach Lemmon. Welcome, Gayle.
Hi, good morning. I don't know if I deserve all those titles, but I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
You absolutely do. I'm so thrilled that you could join us. Thank you for making the time. As you know, we recently read your book, The Dressmaker of Khair Khana, and it was actually a recommendation from a reader, and it was honestly the perfect fit for this book club because we have so much respect and admiration for the women of Afghanistan. We have programs there, and we work with more than 4,000 women through our programs in Afghanistan. And we know how important it is to share the stories of women there. So thank you for bringing Kamala's story to the rest of the world. We received some really great reader feedback, and we decided to extend an invitation to readers to see if they had any questions that they wanted to ask you directly. And before we get into the reader questions, I wanted to ask if you could give some background on the book, The Dressmaker of Khair Khana, and what inspired you to write.
Sure. First of all, it's great to be with you. I had known founders of Women for Women. I've obviously been tracking your work over the years and interviewed women who were part of the program at Women for Women in Kabul, maybe 2006, 2007, many moons back. And what inspired me to write the book was really understanding that there were a whole host of stories about women changing their world, about people who did not stand for the status quo, but believed deeply that their lives could do something to alter it. And I met Kamala in December of 2005 when I was actually at business school. And I had left journalism to go to business school and pursue an MBA and wanted to write about entrepreneurs and conflict and societies, which sounds very boring until you actually meet the people who are doing it. And I met this young woman who was telling me about how she was determined to start this consulting business in Afghanistan in December of 2005. And she sounded like Richard Branson or, somebody who, an entrepreneur with vision. And I said, how do you know this much about business? And I just paused the interview and she said, oh, I thought you knew this is my third business. My first business I started under the Taliban, and we did so much good work for our community that I realized the power of business. And she said, I was supposed to be a teacher, but war took everything from us. Mm-hmm. And the one thing they had left was they could start home businesses because they weren't on the street. They weren't within Taliban site. They were more or less following all the Taliban rules. And they made the difference between survival and starvation for their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, this story flies in the face of everything you think you know about women, about war, about Afghanistan. It is not about a victim story. It's a story about young women who decided that they would change their own community for themselves without any foreigners, without anybody else supporting. They would roll up their sleeves, tap into their God-given talents, and make a difference. And I thought that whole narrative of the victim had to be crushed. Mm-hmm. And that it was going to be crushed by stories like this of homegrown change agents who made a difference between survival and starvation at an absolutely possible time.
That's awesome. And actually, a really lovely segue to the first reader question. So thank you for setting that up so perfectly. So our first question is from reader It's Megroll. And she asked, I really admire the entrepreneurial spirit and resiliency of Kamala. While telling her story and after you concluded writing the book, did you ever imagine where she would end up today?
I did, because I think she would be somebody who would be a leader any place in the world. Mm-hmm. Whether she was in the UK or whether she was in her country. But the thing is, she's a patriot. I mean, deeply, deeply loves her nation and was raised to by her father. And so, no, I think I asked her dad that actually once in the banks of the Panjshir River. And, he looked at me and he said, no, I never was surprised because first God, then me, then Kamala took care of my family. And I never doubted she could do it. And I thought, a young woman who was raised like that with as much God-given time as she had, I didn't doubt it.
Yeah, and that really comes through in the book too, like the determination. And just as a reader, I'm not at all surprised that she went on to do and continue to do really amazing things. So this next question is from Amber Lee MK, who writes, You made it clear in the book that Kamala's family valued education. She was a certified teacher. Her father made sure that all of his children were educated. What are your thoughts on the relationship between educating girls and advancing women's rights?
Educating girls is the center to making sure the world is better, smarter, richer, safer, healthier.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
And that is because they sit right at the center of the family. And educated girls are more likely to bring in income. Income brings dignity. Dignity brings the ability to find certain different circumstances. If you're facing domestic abuse, it gives women incomes, give women many more chances to find different paths if they're facing abuse. That is not to put it on the women, but it's simply to say that it's much easier to find another path when you aren't worried about where you're going to eat.
Yes.
And how, most importantly for most women, how you're going to feed your children.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it over and over again that women who have brought income into the house have completely changed the calculus of power in their home. Sometimes people will say, well, there's an uptick of violence in the short term because as the partner adjusts the situation, but I've seen it in Afghanistan, I've seen it in Rwanda, I've seen it in West Africa, just women talking about money is power. And it's the first thing that Kamala said to me when I met her in 2005. She said, money is power for women and earning an income earns respect. And that's why girls' education matters, because education is so very central to moving up the income line.
Absolutely. Excellent. This next question is from Mighty Pen Journey, who wrote to ask, throughout the book, you painted a vivid picture of what life was like under the Taliban rule. Yeah. Did you experience any blowback from the way you portrayed the Taliban in this book?
Interesting. You have done your job when everyone's unhappy. And so I remember doing Diane Rehm, and somebody wrote me and said, you've sanitized the Taliban years and made it look like girls could get through it. Oh, and wow. Then somebody else wrote me and said, they come after you and your family because you're making the Taliban look bad. And I said, well, wow. Lovely. But the truth is that it's up to the reader. Mm-hmm. For me, I have a hoodie that says, don't read the comments that my family gave me. And I live by that because I always want to engage with readers, but I also know what I see, what I want to put out in the world. My job is not to make people feel a certain way. My job is to hold a flashlight up. Mm-hmm. And help them enter worlds they would never otherwise be able to access. And then they can decide how they feel about what the story meant to them. And I've approached all the books that way. And so I'm willing to live with that if readers are willing to engage. And I never, no matter how many books I never stop appreciating readers engaging with the text, engaging with the story, entering that world. Because time is so very precious. And so I have just enormous respect for readers who take on the story, and I want to hear what they say, but I also understand that you'll never satisfy everybody, and you have to be willing to do that once you put art out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This next question is from Liza Arborgold. How did your background in journalism affect how you told and processed these powerful and emotional stories? What helped you to balance objectivity and compassion for these women and their journeys? And that's actually a question I had as reading too. It's, how do you,
You repeat it because I have been asked probably 25,000 questions. It's one I don't think I've ever gotten.
Ooh.
I love it. So really, how did my experience as a journalist and my background affect the balance between compassion and objectivity? Is that? Mm-hmm. So at the beginning, having been a journalist, I no longer work in daily journalism, but having been a journalist was a real impediment because this editor was working with me. I sent her the first chapter and she said, well, that's marvelous. You just told the whole story in 1,400 words. What are you going to do with the other 80,000 that you owe HarperCollins? And I said, I have no idea. How do you do that? I didn't understand how to build a narrative and stretch it out. I think growing up in a community of single moms in Prince George's County, Maryland, oh, and with a father who came from the Middle East, really helped me, who was always sort of on the outside looking in, really helped me just have extreme amounts of compassion for what people face when they are undercounted and unseen. And all of the books I've had the privilege of writing deal with communities of women underestimated from the outside who rise to the occasion to serve a cause bigger than themselves, not just for themselves, but in service of the community. And those are the themes. That resilience piece is absolutely an obsession for me. What allows you to get up every morning when you've just taken an enormous hit? And the women who raised me really taught me that. So I think that was one of the themes that has always been a passion of mine to understand and probe at more deeply is what is it in the human spirit that allows us to not give up? In terms of journalism, yes, I had covered, sort of timely for this moment, I had covered outside groups in the 2000 campaign, from religious conservatives to labor unions and right to, everybody from NARAL to Right to Life. And I think listening to people's stories and why they came at the issues the way they did, it really started with me as a child, listening to all the women who would come through our house and their different stories, and they often disagreed about many topics, but always had this core of friendship. And I think made me very comfortable in settings where people disagreed or saw the world differently. And it made me really work to balance that. I had a UN worker who said to me, things were much better under the Taliban, Gayle. You could negotiate with them. You weren't worried about getting blown up. You could drive without worrying about things. Nobody took Amr bil Maruf, the vice and virtue, your book readers will know, the vice and virtue forces seriously. And I would work to reconcile that with an interview I did with a 19-year-old girl a young woman who was in tears and said, they took everything from me. She was 19 when the Taliban came. She was what? So that would have been, she was in her late 20s when I met her, mid 20s. And they took my future. They took my hope. They took my ability to get educated because my brother got sent to Iran and I had to be here. She was the only one. She worked for a German NGO doing hygiene programs that the Taliban allowed Germany to keep running. And she became the breadwinner for her entire extended family and never got to pursue the education that she dreamt of. And so I wanted to write a book that would reconcile those views, that would not force the reader into one or the other, but would help them with compassion to understand that those coexisted.
Oh, that's great. And it's interesting too, in reading this book, it really shows what an act of rebellion this school was and Kamala's actions. It's like at every act of oppression from the Taliban, like banning women from education, Kamala set up this sewing school and was teaching girls and women like these valuable skills. They couldn't work and she wasn't allowed to teach, but she found herself in a teaching role. They had music was banned and drawing was banned, but then they were really encouraged through the school to tap into creativity, doing beadwork and designing dresses. And it just showed that in every sense, this was such an act of protest. And it's such a beautiful story. And
thank you. And it's interesting because she was very serious with me about, you cannot make it look like I broke Taliban rules because I didn't. And I thought that was so interesting because she used the space that she had to make a difference. Right? So she was always pushing boundaries. And if you look at the scene in which she survives the Taliban boarding the bus and being very willing to abduct them, and then only God knows what, right? It was because she had spent so much time listening to them and understanding the way they saw the world that she could get them out of that situation. And she was always looking for ways to stretch the rules without breaking them. And I think that's why you see the moment where the Taliban father sends his daughter to go work with her, because he knows that she's an honorable person who's following the rules and yet pushing every boundary imaginable.
Yeah, absolutely. This next question is from Caroline Mohan, who writes, when covering a conflict that is ongoing or particularly volatile, what precautions do you take to protect the character's safety while you're interviewing with them and communicating their story?
It's such a good question because it's so very hard to report out a story. And in fact, the next book that I just finished, which God willing comes out in February from Penguin Press on the 16th, is based in northeastern Syria. And it was dynamic and evolving throughout. Afghanistan, the political situation was somewhat more known, but the security situation was far more volatile when you were there, right? People were getting kidnapped. People I knew were getting kidnapped. People I knew were, I remember one time I was out doing a series of interviews and I turned my phone off and I turned it back on and my text messages blew up. I had like 4,500 messages.
Oh my gosh.
And my phone rang immediately and they're like, this is the U.S. Embassy. Okay. I didn't really have a lot of contact with them. We're just wondering if you're the American who's been kidnapped today. And I said, no, just answered my phone. But thank you for checking. Not that any of it was funny, but you have all these moments that were just, that was normalcy. And the thing is, for me, it was always the dignity of the people who trusted me. They didn't have this magic carpet ride called a passport. And it was very important for me to stay, even if the security situation was rough. As long as my fixer, my colleague Mohammed, as long as he was comfortable working with me, I would stay. There were times when he said, look, I can do that, I should go. And I did that out of respect for him because we really could place people at security risk who worked with you. But overall, I remember one of the teachers, one of the young women who worked with Kamala, who's a professor now, she would say, why are you still here? What are you still doing here? All the foreigners have left. And I said, well, you're here. She said, yeah, but we're from here. And I said, no, but I'm here to get your story. And so that's my job. And I think you just win so much respect from the people who are gracious enough and generous enough to talk with you by simply acknowledging that it's not easy, that they handle it with grace every single day, and that your job is to capture their stories so you can share it with so many more who will never get to meet them in person. And so I talked with a lot of them about changing their names, and I did change many names, and those who wanted to keep their names did. For Kamala, it was marketing for her business. She's like, why would I change my name? It's my business. I want to work with people. With Ashley's War, there were a lot of women whose names I did change because they were in the special operations community in the U.S. And with the one that I'm just finishing now on what ISIS has left in its wake, which is the most far-reaching experiment in women's equality in the least likely place in the world, brought to you by young women who've been fighting ISIS house by house, street by street since 2014 and are building this kind of utopia on the ashes of the ISIS fight. And most of them were fine with their name.
Excellent. So this is our final question, and it's from Kamaya Dean, who writes, what stereotypes of Afghanistan or Afghan women did you hope to challenge through this book?
What a great question. Nearly all of them. Because I remember the first time I went to the Afghan consulate in DC to get a visa, I was like all shrouded up and very dowdy, and I walked in, this gal, beautiful gal, with full face of makeup and high heels. I was like, can I help? I guess I should have actually gotten dressed for this one, So here's my stereotype of it's going to be. And it's like cute color was the only thing that greeted me. So the big thing is that Afghan women are not victims. They are about the strongest people I have ever met, and they are fully capable of determining the shape of their own lives and their own future if the world will just get out of their way and allow them to get on with it and stop hampering progress. And so to me, it was about showing the young women who are the homegrown leaders and the homegrown agents of change. It was the opposite of a rescue story from the outside. It was the story of a young woman who stood up and rescued her community when the whole world had forgotten to.
That's excellent. And we definitely believe that too, just placing the power of decision making in the woman's hand, like let her make choices to dictate her own future. And that's exactly what Kamala did. It's such an incredible story. That is the last of the reader questions, but I can't let you go without asking you a little bit more about Ashley's War and the latest book that you just finished. Can you tell us some more about them?
Absolutely. So Ashley's War was about an all-women special operations team that was recruited for Army Ranger and Navy SEAL missions in 2011, while women were officially banned from combat in this country. And it's really a story of friendship and love and courage and young women who answered their country's call when their country needed them. And these young women who became each other's best friends, counselors, divorce coaches, therapists, the first person they would call in the morning and the person they would text at 1 a.m. because only they knew what they had seen and experiencing the kind of combat seen by less than 5% of the entire United States military, all while women were officially not there. So that is Ashley's War. It's in the process of becoming a film. It's at Universal with Reese Witherspoon and Bruno Pomodrea producing. And we're very excited. We have news that God willing should be coming fairly soon on that.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And then the next book, to your earlier question, is called The Daughters of Kobani, a story of rebellion, courage, and justice. And it's really a Western with policy implications. It's really about the young woman who stood up and said enough. And he pushed to put women's equality at the center of the fight against the Islamic State. And this real showdown that occurred every day from 2013 and 14 till 2018 of men who bought and sold and enslaved women on the streets of Syria against young women with braids and Timex watches and AK-47s and smiley face socks who went into battle against them with right at the center of their ideology. And what happens when these two worldviews collide? And the thing that's funny to me, my last term, is that one of the women who was the leader of the campaign to rout ISIS from Raqqa, its capital, and was America's partner in that. So all of these young women were the ground force in the fight to end the Islamic State's territorial hold. And this woman, I said, well, why did you start an all-women's force in 2013? You already had ideology which said you were equal. You already had men who worked alongside. You had the ability to command men. You didn't really need an all-women's force. And she looked at me and she just said, we just didn't want men taking credit for our work. And I started laughing and said, oh, there's the whole book. Right? Because here, even in the most different context, it was just the most universal idea of women who said, enough, we won't stand for it. And what did it look like to be America's partner? Go in street by street, house by house, town by town, to end the Islamic State itself.
I'm so excited to read it. And how can people?
We'll have to do a book club then.
Absolutely, I am sure that will be on the Women for Women International Book Club list. I'm wondering, how can people stay in touch with, up to date on what you're doing?
Please. So, a couple ways. At Gayle Lemmon on Twitter, GAYLE, LEMMON. And then Instagram, same thing. I promise to do more Insta. I am much lazier about it, but it's going to be, you'll see lots of previews, both from Ashley's War and from this upcoming book. And there'll be lots of Insta Live and all that stuff when the book is coming out. And then finally, my website is GayleLemmon.com, and all of the messages go to me, and the newsletter will start in November. So I have a newsletter coming. Just put in contact to sign up, and we'll.
Excellent. And I follow you on Instagram, and I love your stories. What you're sharing is so interesting, and especially with your latest book, all of the images from Raqqa and the interviews and the people you're talking to, it is so interesting. So I would definitely recommend following you.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited. I love talking to readers. It's one of my favorite things. I'm so excited to get your questions. And I really look forward to doing things around Daughters of Kobani too, because I think that your readers, your community understands what this is. And we've already gotten just amazing endorsements from everybody from Angelina Jolie to Admiral McRaven. And so it's really exciting to see people get behind this book that challenges the status quo. And if you look from Dressmaker to Ashley's War to Daughters of Kobani, it is the same set of themes, right? Resilient women who stood up to serve a cause greater than themselves. And if we can reshape the way we see our war stories with women right at the center, then we will have done something to make sure that we understand the full picture of what happens in conflict.
That's wonderful. I'm so looking forward to reading it. Gayle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me
My
today.
pleasure.
This has been
Great to meet
awesome.
you. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and best to all of you out there.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.